Hi, my name's Maya and I am a care worker. I was working throughout the peak of the COVID-19 crisis this year. It was a difficult time for some of the most emotionally vulnerable and physically vulnerable people in our society, as well as those supporting them. But I do understand why it had to happen. However, I do feel now with the daily death rate, not the case rate, being so low, it's maybe time that we started returning to some degree of freedom and normality so as not to further damage the mental health of the nation. My own mother was scared to have me around her house in case her neighbours informed on her, which is a shocking state of affairs for a Western country to be in. This is why I am supporting recovery, and I hope you will too.
I'm Neil Shah, Chief De-Stressing Officer at the Stress Management Society and the Chief Insights Officer at International Wellbeing Insights. And I very much welcome the launch of Recovery at a time where mental health seems to have been deprioritized and sidelined. And some of the most vulnerable members of our society are suffering tremendously as a result of this. The restrictions that have been applied as a result of lockdown and because of COVID-19 have started to have a real serious impact, and we need to take action urgently before it gets any worse.
Hello, I'm John Dobinson, co-founder of Recovery, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our launch. We've all had to watch a lot of grim TV lately. Welcome to a different channel. On the other side, there's Matt Hancock and his lockdowns. Sounds like a band, doesn't it? Sadly, the only tune they know is the Death March. They play it endlessly, and it's wearing pretty thin. It's like Soviet TV after Brezhnev died. All they want to do is shut everything down. On our side, there's hope. There's reason. There's balance. There's a future. Above all, there's recovery. And by heavens, this country needs it. We need recovery for our young people and their mental health. We need recovery for hard-pressed families. We need recovery for the pensioners cut off from the world, bathing in the waves of fear rolling out from the box in the corner, trembling at the germs crouching outside, ready to spring on them, dying slowly in a lonely and sanitized hell. Let's be honest, we all need recovery. It is in our own hands. If we stand up and say no more, all this will end. But we live most of our lives amidst moral complexity. Issues are rarely clear-cut. That's our normal operating system. However, there are those rare moments when the choice is straightforward. We can choose right or wrong. And this is a battle with no moral ambiguity. I know with every fiber of my being that COVID policy is wrong. It is wrong to prevent people from attending the bedside of a dying parent. It is wrong to lock up young people, deny them a future, and condemn them to mental torture. It is wrong to terrify old people so they spend the last months of their lives in a hell of loneliness, isolation, and fear. Secretly, we all want someone else to fight the battle. It's easy to turn away and hope someone will fix things. In times of trouble, we wait for heroes. Many think if they say something, it could cost them their job. I've heard that many times recently. Above all, from the growing numbers of NHS staff who can see that this is not right. But in a battle between right and wrong, there is no middle way. You stand up for what's right, or you allow the wrong to win. It's obvious why people are scared to say what they think. Hancock, Cummings, and the lockdowners have looked in the cupboard to see what they have by way of arguments. It's obvious there wasn't much in it. The facts don't look good for lockdown. The countries which chose this route are going through hell. In those that didn't lock down, the scary predictions have not come true. That's no surprise. At the start of this, sage scientists themselves advised that lockdowns would postpone deaths, but ultimately bring about more. That's a basic fact of epidemiology. And we can see it playing out around us. So that cupboard was bare of persuasive facts and arguments. All the lockdowners found in it were two grim-looking spray cans. One marked fear, one marked smear. And that's what they've sprayed constantly into this debate to stop this country seeing sense. They're the fear and smear brigade. We all know about the fear. It's causing a mental health crisis. Only this morning, I saw very sad news from the London Ambulance Service, who said that they're seeing suicide attempts almost double up from last year. Just think about the tragedy of that for a moment. People who commit suicide are typically very young, at the start of their lives. When they die, it's not just their death, it's not just their life that's shattered. All those that love them will carry that gap with them through the rest of their lives. We should think very, very seriously before we dismiss that kind of damage. But those who have spoken out to date have been smeared, intimidated, and abused. Even world experts like Nobel laureate Michael Levitt have been banned from speaking, in his case, for pointing out that lockdowns may cause more death than they prevent. That approach cannot last. A light shines brighter in darkness. Those who have spoken out have shown the rest of us the way. And it is time to show them that they are no longer alone. Recovery has launched as a broad coalition of people from every walk of life to call for a reasoned, balanced debate on the best way to tackle COVID-19. We're here to give a voice to all those people who've known this is wrong, but haven't felt able to speak up. We're here to tell NHS workers that they need no longer be afraid to tell the truth about what's happening in hospitals. And we're glad so many are joining. We're here to drown out Matt Hancock and his lockdowners, with all the musicians who've been unable to play, all the actors who've been unable to act, all the sports fans who've been unable to cheer, and all the laughter of the children who have been unable to play. We say no more destructive and counterproductive policies, no more rushed and confused legislation, no more harsh rules that will kill more than they save. It's about getting the balance right. So we've set out 5 reasonable demands for good government during COVID-19. Act with humanity. No more rules like the ones that ban a child from the bedside of a dying parent. Regard all lives as of equal importance. No more allowing living, breathing cancer patients to die to keep resources for all those imagined COVID patients who only ever show up in Neil Ferguson's dodgy steam-powered forecasting models. Hold a comprehensive public inquiry into every aspect of what's gone wrong and permit a balanced debate. safeguard the things that make life worth living, and allow our children the chance of a decent future. Those are pretty moderate demands. I think most people would agree. But apparently, they contain enough humanity, truth, and hope to make the fear and smear brigade foam at the mouth. I suspect they'll shortly be foaming so freely they'll drown in their own saliva. Because we've had enough fear and smear. It is time for recovery. And now, for all the audiences who've been unable to cheer, 4 speakers who deserve the Albert Hall. I'm going to hand over to my co-founder, Grant Mercer, to introduce them.
Thank you, John. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the launch event of the Recovery Campaign, for hope, for balance. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today, but before I introduce them, some via video link and some here in person, I'd just like to inform you of 3 key points. Firstly, if we have time at the end, then questions can be asked, and all speakers will be happy to take questions. Secondly, if you're joining us online, then submit your questions via the Q&A function, and they'll be asked at the end. And finally, to let everybody know, clearly there are photographers here. Should you not wish to be photographed, then please find an appropriate seat that isn't in the limelight. As John said, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. And I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker today, Lord Sampson, a great supporter of the campaign. Lord Sampson is an author, a commentator, and a former senior judge who sat on the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom until 2018. So joining us by video link, Lord Sampson, if I can hand over to you, please.
Right. Am I now audible?
Yes, you are.
Good. Thank you. I am not a scientist. The ministers who make decisions about measures against COVID-19 are not scientists. Most of our fellow citizens are not scientists. But I believe that every citizen should try to understand the science, even if he or she cannot contribute to it personally. When scientists disagree, as they clearly do about COVID-19, the critical faculties of laymen are particularly important. There are qualities which are required in the current crisis, in addition to scientific knowledge. We need rational thought and not panic flight from uncomfortable facts. We need strategic thought, which looks to the long term and not just a series of expedients in response to the latest pressures. We need a sense of proportion and an ability to learn from our long experience of a problem which has been with humanity for as long as humanity has existed. We need to look at the crisis as a whole and not just at the medical side of it. For this is not just a public health crisis, it is a social crisis, an economic crisis, an educational crisis, among other things. Even on the medical side, there is more to it than just COVID-19. COVID-19 is the thing for which politicians are most afraid of being blamed. But their countermeasures have serious and negative collateral effects on other medical issues, notably cancer and on mental health. In the long term, how to slow the spread of the virus is an important question, but it is very far from being the only one. Mankind has always lived with epidemic diseases. Many of them have been zoonotic, that's to say, they have transferred from animals to humans, often through the food chain. Over the centuries, human societies have adapted to epidemic diseases by building up herd immunity, or to give it a less loaded name, collective immunity, which is the term used in most countries. Collective immunity may only be temporary or partial, but it does make it progressively more difficult for the disease to spread. Collective immunity is the process by which humanity has been able to survive in a natural world where disease is endemic. Infectious disease is both an enemy and a friend. If in the past humanity had been able to find a completely sterile refuge in which to retreat from disease, assuming that such a thing were possible, it would have no immunity and by now would probably be extinct. By the standards of the past, COVID-19 has so far proved to be a relatively mild epidemic. Other historical epidemics have had far higher case mortality rates: bubonic plague, smallpox, cholera, tuberculosis, Spanish flu, to name only the better documented ones. Tuberculosis still kills many more people in the world than COVID-19 or indeed any coronavirus. So why do we look upon COVID-19 as an unprecedented catastrophe? There are, I think, two main reasons why we do. One is that recent pandemics have mainly affected Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. This has given us in Europe and the United States, North America, an illusion of security, which makes COVID-19 seem much more shocking and out of place than it really is. The other reason I would suggest is that the remarkable achievements of medical science over the past century have given us an illusion of omnipotence. We have persuaded ourselves that there is nothing that cannot be achieved by governments armed with science and enough wisdom and money. We are now discovering that this is a grievous mistake. Viruses are only amenable to very limited degrees of external control. What is really unprecedented is not the virus itself, but our response to it. Human societies have always known about infection, even if they did not always understand the exact physiological mechanisms involved. They have always isolated infected people. In the Great Plague of London, crosses were marked on the doors of households where infected people lived, and soldiers were posted at the door to prevent them leaving. This is the first time that we have tried to deal with an epidemic by isolating healthy people as well. We have tried, in effect, to run away from it into a sterile space that does not really exist. The cost of this attempt is extremely high. I'm not talking just about the economic cost, large as that is. Trying to hide from the COVID virus involves suppressing some basic features of our humanity: our sociability, our need for cooperative work, our emotional dependence on interchange with other human beings. These things are not some kind of optional extra which we can learn to do without, like drinking alcohol in Lent or doing without sugar in your tea. The whole of our world is built on human sociability. It is what distinguishes life from mere existence. There are good reasons to believe that our continent and our world will have to face further threats, at least as serious as COVID-19 in future. We cannot just keep running away or defy the forces of nature indefinitely. We cannot suspend the ordinary currents of human life every time that this happens. We have to learn to live with disease as our ancestors have done for many centuries with success. You don't need to be a scientist to recognize the irrationality at the heart of government policy. What is wrong with it is that it isn't a strategy. It's just a series of short-term expedients with no exit plan, no end game. The virus is now endemic. Aggressive measures of social distancing cannot suppress it. It can only spread the infections over a longer period of time. This point was well put in the advice given to the government in February and March by the Imperial College team, which includes Professor Ferguson, and recorded in the Sage papers on the government website. And it's worth quoting what they said. The primary impact, they wrote, of such measures is to delay transmission and reduce peak incidence. When they are lifted, transmission can be expected to resume, given that the measures only protect the population while they're in operation, like vaccination. The overall impact on overall attack is therefore limited. In this context, measures which are too effective merely push all transmission to the period after they are lifted, giving a delay but no substantial reduction in either peak incidence or overall attack rate. Now, those words ought to be inscribed on the heart of every minister, because what we are now experiencing exactly bears them out. Lockdowns do not, in the long term, suppress infection. They suppress it only while they remain in force. The infections and the associated deaths, which are reduced during a lockdown, simply occur later after it has been lifted. Lockdowns are therefore not a way out unless they are permanent. If lockdowns don't work in the long term, then that must be even more true of lesser measures of social distancing, such as circuit breakers, rules of six, travel quarantines, and the like. All of these devices are simply more or less ineffective ways to push infections and associated deaths into a future period. None of those who are stridently calling for more measures of this kind has explained why they will be any more successful next time than they were last time. Unless there's a magic bullet somewhere, we have to expect that current measures, when they are lifted, will be followed by a third wave, a fourth wave, and so on, until eventually we do, in spite of ourselves, acquire sufficient collective immunity. What these measures can achieve is to buy time. But buying time is only a worthwhile policy if there is something valuable that we can do with the extra time, if it enables us to find that magic bullet. Without a magic bullet, all that buying time achieves is to prolong the crisis and to delay the moment when we acquire a useful measure of collective immunity. Without a magic bullet, that is its effect. Yet it is surely obvious that with every month by which we artificially prolong this crisis, more people will be infected, more people will die, more people will suffer serious mental illness, more people will lose their jobs, more of what makes life worth living will have been gratuitously damaged or destroyed. The human cost of this approach is appalling. So what is the magic bullet that will get us out of this unending vicious cycle? A vaccine is the only candidate that anyone has ever proposed. We don't know when a vaccine will become available. But the big question is not when a vaccine will become available and when we will have succeeded in administering it to a high proportion of a population of 66 million. The big question is how effective it will be. A vaccine is not an alternative to collective immunity. It is simply a faster route to collective immunity. It works by replicating the immunological effect of the disease itself. There are diseases like smallpox or measles for which exposure to the disease will give you a lifetime of natural immunity, and so will a vaccine. There are diseases like flu for which exposure to the disease will confer only a partial and temporary natural immunity, in which case so will a vaccine. Most immunologists that I have spoken to, or whose work has been published, now think that a COVID vaccine will be of the second kind. It will not be a magic word. It will only be partially and temporarily effective. So we will still have to live with COVID-19 long term, just as we have had to live with flu. Flu is, of course, a much less serious disease than COVID-19, but it's still serious enough to kill 30,000 people in the UK in a bad year. What if, as seems increasingly probable, a COVID vaccine is more like a flu vaccine, effective enough to give a measure of immunity, but not to get rid of the disease? The answer is that if that rather probable scenario works out as it seems likely to, then we will have to live with COVID-19, whether we like it or not, just as we've had to live with flu. Of course, there are steps that we can and must take to protect ourselves. We have to build up the critical care capacity of our health system. We have to promote research on methods of treatment. We have to sort out the problems of care homes where more than 40% of deaths have occurred. We have to take active steps to protect the old and clinically vulnerable, so far as they wish to be protected, because of course many of them will prefer quality of life to quantity, and that is their option. There are no attractive options, none. We have to choose the least painful out of a number of choices, all of which will involve the death of significant numbers of people. The reason why I find the Great Barrington Declaration persuasive is that it offers a rational exit route. It happens to be the exit route which has brought almost every other epidemic in history to an end. A few viral epidemics have come to an end because the virus has mutated into a less dangerous form. There is some evidence that this is what happened a century ago to Spanish flu. Short of that, or of a totally effective vaccine, all of them have simply burnt themselves out because the population acquired enough natural immunity to impede its continued transmission. It seems pointless to complain that a policy of collective natural immunity is immoral or heartless, which is the point that's usually made against it. This kind of statement is simply a way of closing our eyes to emotionally uncomfortable facts. It's a way of evading awkward dilemmas. We have to confront our dilemmas and not run away with them. Collective natural immunity is simply a description of how most epidemics end. To describe a policy based on it as immoral presupposes that there is some alternative that will bring it to an end less painfully or faster. None of those who have denounced the Great Barrington Declaration have come up with such an alternative, as they surely would have done if it existed. Their proposal is simply to carry on with a policy of aggressive social distancing, which has demonstrably failed in every country where it has been applied, and which has caused untold collateral damage. Human societies are extremely complex organisms. You cannot play around with the basic principles on which humans exist without inviting unwanted collateral consequences, some of which will be extremely harmful. You cannot suppress one aspect of human existence without a serious impact on others. We have to be able to think about more than one thing at a time. We have turned the entire hospital system over to COVID-19 without thinking about the impact this would have on other killers like cancer. We have closed schools without thinking of the long-term and in many cases irreparable educational damage this would cause. We have closed down major parts of the economy without thinking of the number of jobs that would disappear, not just for the duration of the lockdown, but for good. It is time for ill-thought-out expedients of this kind to come to an end. The Great Barrington Programme is not a perfect solution. Its authors would not suggest that it is. But it is at least a programme which looks beyond the end of our noses into the long term. It offers an eventual exit from a mess, an exit which is rational, which draws on historical experience, and which carries less human costs than any of the alternatives on offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Sampson, for those excellent and informative words. I'd like now to introduce our next speaker. We're all aware of how the performing arts sector has been hugely affected by the restrictions. And I'd like to introduce promoter Harvey Goldsmith, who's seen at first hand just some of the devastation that's been caused. Ladies and gentlemen, Harvey Goldsmith.
Thank you for having me here. I'm here selfishly to make a plea for the music business. There was a report published last week called the Cliff Edge Report, when we delved right into the live music industry, which in 2019, sorry about that. For those who didn't hear, I'm here to talk about the music industry. Last week there was a report called the Cliff Edge Report that was published looking into the interests of the live music industry, which in 2019 was worth £4.5 billion to the UK. But since March, the revenues have been virtually zero. 210,000 people work in the British or the UK's music industry. 52,000 full-time, and the rest either on 0 hours or working as freelancers. 50% of those people working full-time will have lost their jobs by the end of the year. 26,100 jobs have already disappeared. And if you consider the ecosystem around live music, from trucking companies to ticket agencies, from bus companies to hotels, the number affected in total is huge. The £1.57 billion recovery fund that the government trumpets mainly went to buildings and arts centres and arts organisation. The reduction of VAT, which the Chancellor kindly gave our industry to 5%, is fantastic, but unfortunately, very few tickets are being sold because there's very little on sale. In the main, socially distanced concerts and events and shows don't work either emotionally, and they certainly don't work financially. We in the commercial sector have never been subsidised, and we'd rather not be now. What we want is a target date to restart. This is something that everybody who works on our side of the world, from whether they're theatre producers or show producers, have been asking of the government. And you probably heard Andrew Lloyd Webber talking at Select Committee in Parliament for exactly the same thing. It's the single most important thing that we as an industry currently need. It's a target date to restart. By testing out a set of protocols, which then we can work with for the near future. Fast tests, visible results on apps, cleaning of venues, sanitizing guests, masks or no masks. All these issues need to be sorted out, and we have to work backwards from a target date to test everything so that we can finally have a set of protocols to evaluate them medically and, of course, financially. It's just not acceptable that when the government turns around on Tuesday and says, oh, you can start again on Saturday, that it works. We need months of planning. We need to get things together. We need to do what all normal businesses do, which is marketing, selling tickets, making the arrangements, etc. It just doesn't happen overnight. Once we have an approved set of protocols to offer to all promoters, then we will be able to be prepared, ready to go, with the hindsight that at any time, if the virus really gets bad, that we will have to stop at the last minute, but at least we have everything prepared and ready. And at the moment, we cannot get the government to focus on looking backwards from a target date. Panic moves are unhelpful. We need much more time to prepare. So many factors depend on a thriving musical industry. the nighttime health of cities, and the welfare of the public are all intertwined. So, my plea is, let us get back to work. It can be done safely. And just a few facts and figures about the state that the industry is in. For artists and managers, there is currently a 64% drop in 220 earnings against 219. All these are against last year. Booking agents, 82%. Promoters, 78.4%. Grassroots music venues, 95.1%. Larger venues, arenas and stadia, 74%. Festivals, 90.2%. Ticketing companies, 86.7%. Technical suppliers, 95%. Crews, 87.6%. Support staff, which includes ticket takers and people at venues, 87.5%. And professional services, which is lawyers and accountants, 52.9%. Overall, there will be 54.9% redundancies in our industry this year. So our plea is, please, let us get these protocols together. Let us protect the musical heritage that we dominate globally. And let us get back to work. We don't need your money. We want to work. Thank you.
Music journalist and author. I think it's time for us to have a more balanced, calm, rational discussion about all of this, and that's why I'm supporting recovery.
Hello, I'm Christopher Snowden from the Institute of Economic Affairs. I just want to say that I'm supporting recovery.
Hi, my name is Jo Wood, and I support Recovery's campaign to bring balance, normality, and common sense back in the fight against COVID-19.
I'm supporting recovery because I want to see the UK's prosperity and creativity return.
I welcome recovery because I am a mental health practitioner and a therapist specialising in complex PTSD, anxiety and depression, and I have never been as gravely concerned about mental health and the future of mental health as I am now. I'm seeing a lot of people who didn't have issues prior to the lockdown, prior to the harsh restrictions that we now find ourselves living under, who are now presenting with anxiety, depression and OCD. A lot of these are children and teenagers, and I'm very, very concerned. Recovery has come along at just the right moment. It is a campaign calling for balance, for moderation, for proper public debate and discussion, and I couldn't welcome it anymore.
I believe these measures have caused and will cause immense harm to society, which will be permanent unless the government changes track and does so quickly.
The government needs to really think about how they're dealing with coronavirus. At the moment, it's a mess. None of it's backed by science. Many people, millions of people, have lost their jobs. Businesses are closing by the minute. The hospitality industry is being destroyed. The events industry, our arts and culture are going down the pan because the government do not know what they're doing. They've outsourced work that they should know to do themselves to Sage, and Sage has come back with different sets of data, which is not solid. So all these actions which are happening, there's more than just people's jobs which are being lost. Lives are going to be lost. People that need cancer screenings, people that need to be seen to urgently by the NHS have been put back. That's why I'm supporting recovery.
Hi, I'm Lisa Nash. I'm a presenter and fitness and body coach. I'm really behind this recovery campaign. It's everything that the health and the well-being industry stands for.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank Harvey for sharing with us the true impact of restrictions on the entertainment and music industry. Our next speaker is joining us by video link and is a respected psychologist and psychotherapist, Emma Kenny. Emma has spoken widely about the psychological effect of restrictions, and I'm very pleased to hand over to her today. Emma.
Thank you. The reason that I entered the therapeutic field was for one single reason. I believed in hope. Hope has always been beneath every therapeutic action that I've taken. It forms the foundation of my thoughts. It's why I stand before you here today. And for the first time in my life, as a therapist, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister and a friend, I feel my hope is being challenged on every level. I'm witnessing a sustained and a powerful attack on the mental well-being of every single human in the UK. An attack that is being branded as protection. Human beings are animals. We require human contact, close connection, and social bonds, not simply to thrive, but to survive. Research is telling us a terrifying story, and one that will be told for many, many years to come. One whose ending will be decided based on moments like today. The damage is being furthered with every passing second. The time bomb is ticking, growing more powerful, more grotesque, with outcomes far bigger and far wider than most of you listening will have even dared to imagine. And if we allow restrictions to continue this way, the death, damage, and destruction will only grow. I and so many of my peers believe fiercely that children, more than any other demographic, require safeguarding. Legally and morally, our democratic society should wish to protect children from harm. In fact, the Children's Act clearly and rightly states that children's welfare should be the paramount concern, and that physical, emotional, social, and educational harm is unacceptable on any level where children are concerned. Safeguarding measures exist so that the health, well-being, and human rights of individuals, especially children, young people, and the vulnerable, are protected, so that they can live a life free from harm, abuse, and neglect. Yet harm, abuse, and neglect is exactly what the current restrictions are causing. The last 7 months has seen an exponential rise in reported levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, with research finding that 80% of young people are experiencing a decline in their mental health. Suicidal thoughts in young people are also sharply rising. These are children, and they are so afraid, so traumatized, so concerned about their future that they are deciding whether to experience a future at all. Self-harm has increased. It is now believed that 1 in 6 of our children meet the criteria for a mental health problem. What are we doing? How can we fail our future so dreadfully? And failing, we are. The messages pumped into our population to terrify so many of us into submission have been reprehensible, unnecessary, and so traumatizing that children's charities are now dealing with COVID PTSD. And even more depressing is that most of these children will fail to receive any help whatsoever, because mental health services couldn't cope before this pandemic, before we crippled a whole generation who deserved so much more. The government and the media have taught children to be afraid of living, of playing, of loving. They've even gone as far as telling our impressionable youth that they have the power to kill granny. Imagine what that has done to children who have lost loved ones during this pandemic, even if that was through other conditions. Yet this type of unacceptable conditioning has been allowed to trample all over developing brains of children and young people. One of the biggest killers in the UK is poverty. In fact, poor people die on average 10 years younger than their affluent peers. And yet, who are restrictions affecting most? The poor. And children in poverty are 2.5 times more likely to die before they even reach adulthood than those who are affluent. This was what research told us before the coronavirus, before the poverty gap grew wider and bigger than ever before. Children and young people are having their security ripped apart on every level. Their education, which for some children is the only consistent safety and care that they experience, has been utterly desecrated and thrown into chaos. Many children who are struggling with their academic journey have had an irreparable hole blown into their learning. They have had their futures stolen. through this unforgivable state neglect. They are watching their parents lose jobs. They will soon watch them lose their homes because restrictions are killing the economy, ruining businesses, and devastating the employment landscape, meaning that many adults will struggle to find work again. I look at opinion polls and I see the government reacting to a small percentage of the population whose interests are less to do with we and all to do with me. They are not affected by restrictions. They do not feel the pang of hunger or the threat of abuse, so they can enjoy their sunrise and sunset without noticing the agony that lies in less privileged places as restrictions ruin lives. Did you know that 2 million homes in the UK have no access to the internet? And 30 million people rely on pay-as-you-go phones with limited data, meaning that the poorest and most marginalised have no voice. Imagine having no voice. This silence means that they cannot tell you their stories. And their story will unequivocally be to end restrictions so that they can feed their children and remain in the jobs and homes that they deserve to keep. What future are we creating for our children? The slogan, Build Back Better, may have a nice ring to it, thought up in some middle-class PR meeting where no doubt those who came up with it imagined that the Twitterati would hashtag the hell out of it, and suddenly all the devastation would just disappear. But in truth, there is no Build Back Better for most of us here in the UK, and for some, there will be no build back at all. And why are we even at this point? Because aside from week 17 of the pandemic in mid-April, all-cause mortality rates this year are comparable to recent years. And 99% of coronavirus are mild. Yet we continue to destroy the lives and livelihoods of millions of people in the UK. How have we arrived here? And how is this being allowed to continue? Because if I am to draw any conclusions from this situation, it is that the coronavirus restrictions have been branded as being brought in to protect the vulnerable and have done the absolute opposite. In fact, I do see coronavirus as one of the biggest threats to humanity, but only because of the utterly inhumane restrictions that are killing many, many more than they ever came close to protecting. When I read the statistics on child suicide and it lists deaths between the ages of 10 and 19 years of age, 10. I know that society is fundamentally broken. And a society that continues to accept this is barbaric, hostile, and anti-democratic. If we continue to support restrictions, knowing the catastrophic collateral damage that is happening with every second that passes at a cost to everything else, then we are knowingly and therefore willingly choosing to kill many other people by many other means, children included, whether that be from suicide, cancer, heart disease, poverty, social isolation, or dementia, to name just a few. We cannot turn away from the uncomfortable truth that the government is not only failing to protect us, but now actively choosing to harm us, to harm our children, our parents, our siblings, our friends. They are failing to protect our high streets, our entrepreneurs, our businesses, our futures. And whilst you may find it hard to look that reality in the eye because of what that reality may mean, now is not the time to turn away. Because without you, without all of you, my lone voice is just a whisper. But if you join me and if you stand with us at Recovery, then this whisper becomes a roar. Every generation witnesses a moment in time that has the power to change the world. And for us, that moment is now. Stand up for what is right. Protect our children. Free the elderly from their care home restrictions, allow families to thrive, breathe back life into business, and give each and every human being in the UK their God-given right to autonomy, to freedom of choice, because that is democracy. And for all our sakes, it's time to demand it back. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Emma, for that passionate and informative insight into the problems that the restrictions are causing and for starting the roar. The next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, who's here in person, has been described as a leading world authority on cancer, He was the founder of Cancer Partners UK and professor and chairman of the Department of Cancer Medicine at Imperial College School of Medicine. I introduce Professor Carol Sikora.
Really great to be here. Difficult to beat that. But, you know, there's a lot of emotion flying around. Let me be the medic and just bring us back to facts. I can give you 6 reasons why lockdown is a bad idea. Number 1, why does it work? Wales goes into a 2-week lockdown, the fire break. What's going to be different on the 9th of November when they all go back to work? Nothing. It can't be any different. Sure, the reproductive rate of the virus may drop a bit, but within 2 days, it'll be back to normal. So you've wasted billions of pounds in Wales to get to exactly the same position. And no one I've asked, even the fancy epidemiologists at Imperial, can't tell me that I'm wrong. They say, yes, but you've reduced the pressure. But what for? The second thing, is the NHS really under pressure this time? Last time, it had very good strategy to stop normal activity. We'll come back to that in a moment, to allow people to prepare the Nightingale hospitals. It was the peak day for admissions was the 8th of April. And by then, everything was coping well. What wasn't coping so well was the collateral damage to other healthcare problems. If you take today, there are certain parts where there's a very high incidence rate and the hospitals are very busy. Hospitals are admitting in the last 24 hours, 1,228 patients across the UK. But some places like London, there's a handful of patients. Buckingham, where I live, and I'm on the trust board there, again, 5 patients in the hospital. So it's not flooding the system. So that takes me to the third point, which is the key diseases that you can't put on the shelf. We've heard them already: cancer, heart attacks, and strokes. You just can't say, come back in 3 months. You've got to treat them there and then. Some with great urgency, heart attacks need stenting to prevent later collapse of the muscle of the heart and long-term heart failure and earlier death. And in the case of stroke, to dissolve the clot to avoid brain damage. So there's no doubt, and with cancer, which is my specialty, you really need to get on with it within a month at least. And today, Macmillan Fund launched their report showing that there are 50,000 undiagnosed cancers out there. How do they know that? They just look at the same sort of curves we look at daily for coronavirus, but you look at cancer and you can show that where are the missing 50,000 patients? The date today, nearly the very end of October, we'd expect 50,000 more people to have come through this year that haven't come through. Cancer is not like COVID. It doesn't go up and down winter and summer, and not like influenza. It just doesn't change with the seasons. It's a plateau. It just keeps going. 1,000 new patients a day. That's what you expect. And we haven't seen that number yet. So we've got to do something for that. The fourth problem, mental health. We've heard about it. London Ambulance Service report shocking data. Suicidal ideation. Some of my colleagues talk to, I've never heard this before amongst oncologists, but talking about suicide quite openly over coffee. It's because it is so depressing out there. There's nothing to look forward to. You remove a future joy, you get depression. And it's not just suicide, that's one extreme end, suicidal ideation being another, but much more commonly, low-level depression. And imagine how bad it is for people that are poor, that live in substandard accommodation and are lonely. Depression really bites there. Lockdown doesn't improve mental health. We know it doesn't. The other thing, David Nabarro, who is going to be I hope, the Director General of the WHO, but sadly is now the ambassador. It was given to someone else, the job. But fantastic quote where he says, poor people, the only thing lockdown does is make poor people poorer. And we've heard that already. It's inevitable. People on the breadline, people in the gig economy are not going to survive this if we go into some sort of complete lockdown with unending contract. They just can't do it. I remember at the very beginning of this, wanting to go to Liverpool, and I got on the number 18 bus at Marylebone on the High Street, on the main road, Euston Road. And it was full of people, and it was clear they had to go to work. They were sitting on that bus with their tools and so on, and they were going to work. And they're probably paid 10, 12 pounds an hour to do it. And they're doing it because they had to. It's all right for public sector workers. They can stay at home, they're going to get a pension, and people with middle class houses that we've heard, you know, a nice lifestyle. Most of them in this room have a nice lifestyle. But if you're poor already and you're going to be very poorer, it's not great. And then finally, and Lord Sampson's talked about it already, the whole purpose of lockdown in the back of my mind is you're delaying, you're waiting for something, you're waiting for an exit. What's the exit? A vaccine. Is that really likely? I had the flu jab yesterday. I know it doesn't work, but you know, it sort of half works. I may as well go to Tesco's and give myself the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is, there's so many billions of dollars riding. 6 major big pharma companies are riding. Their chairmen are spouting stuff. Their chief executives are talking about it. We can't take the image that vaccines for all these types of viruses, SARS, the 2003 SARS, MERS, 2012 MERS, you know, the vaccines only work partially. They're not very effective. Collective immunity, to me, seems a better way out, just as Lord Sampson is saying. And I think, you know, for the sake of the patients I treat, cancer patients, we've got to get out of this quicker, long before a vaccine comes. Otherwise, more people are going to die. The other thing, the final thought I'd leave you with is if you look at the number of life years lost rather than the number of deaths from the disease, the average life year lost with COVID is relatively low because the people tend to be over 80 that die. The average death in the UK was 82.4 over the last 6 months from COVID. Now that's the case. Now, obviously it's a distribution and there are some young people that do, and that's inevitable in healthcare. But if you look at that 82.4, much left of normal life expectancy beyond 82.4. Sure, some of us will live to be 100, but most will die around that time anyway of something else. If you take cancer, you take heart attack, and you take strokes, the number of life years that you could save there is enormous. And looking at back of the envelope calculations, almost certainly there are over 100 life years to be saved for every COVID patient if you treated cancer properly. And that's the calculation we need to do. Lockdowns go against it, not just because you shut down healthcare, but also you make people too scared to even pick up the phone to go to their GP and have a consultation. So they put up with chest pain, they put up with weight loss, with coughing up blood and so on, because they just don't want to go in a time of lockdown. Some of it's altruistic, they don't want to make the health service have problems. Some of it is just complete fear, and they're locked in a vicious cycle of fear that won't allow them to get their bodies sorted out. So, you know, for living for tomorrow, what we've got to do now is persuade the government not to automatically pull down the lockdown strategy to try and contain the virus. It's not a good way forward as far as I can see. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Sikora, for some incredible statistics, insight, and evidence as to the real issues the restrictions are causing. I'd now like to pass over to our final speaker, Alan Miller, for some closing remarks. Alan, he's joining us by video link.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Grant. And firstly, I'd like to thank our speakers, Lord Sampson, Harvey Goldsmith, Emma Kenny, and Professor Sikora, as well as John, for a very compelling welcome. And as you've seen in the video, they represent and embody the spirit of collaboration from such a broad section of society, as well as partnership, that I think we can all see is so really needed right now. Indeed, in many ways, they embody the very spirit of recovery. When we launched the Nighttime Industry Association, it was with some of the most dynamic and independent entrepreneurs in the country. I would continually talk about the vital importance of our public spaces as well as our private ones. That to have dynamic cities, we have to have ambition and creativity and innovation, intelligence, smart planning, reflection and nuance. that we should strive to make things more beautiful, more intelligently, and to curate cities, regions, and landscapes that are culturally profound. When the Philistines want to attack, they belittle our endeavours by pretending that the public is stupid and is only interested in pettiness and indulgence. It has become sadly quite common when bereft of ideas or any broader political solutions or vision to claim that the people are mad and bad and dangerous or antisocial. And rather than having compelling ideas capable of winning hearts and minds and solving our problems together, the impulse has often been to pass rules, to regulate, to restrict, and yes, to suffocate. Yet we've all seen the truly inspiring example of how so many in Britain were willing to volunteer and step up to help one another, even though the majority were never called upon, which was a moment that we could have harnessed so much. Yet we've seen it in our daily lives when our neighbours offer to get the shopping, or for those that are shielding, and when so many contribute to volunteering in different ways. We need to remember that we're all in this together. While working to get local authorities and national politicians to recognise that pubs and bars and clubs and festivals are not just places where people drink, but places where people connect, share ideas, make new friends, and new projects are born and inspiration occurs. While we had many successes along the road, the last 7 months have illustrated both how exceptionally important our places of coming together are, as well as how decimating it is to social and cultural life when things shut down. It has become apparent that the government has stopped listening properly. The transition from the initial, I believe, genuine attempt to grapple with very difficult circumstances to what has become a hunkered down, blinkered vision series of knee-jerk impositions, such as the rule of 6 and the 10 p.m. curfew and other things that today's speakers have spoke so eloquently on, not only bear no correlation to evidence, but also disingenuously then seek to blame both the dynamic professionals, entrepreneurs, and also the public at large for the problem. Now, this is the first part of any recovery. It's to be able to identify the problems, then to have a strategy. To recover, we need to be able to do that together. It's in this spirit that I joined with John Dobinson and the fantastic team at Recovery as co-founder of Recovery, bringing together a broad array of different people who can show by example what recovery means. As Hannah Arendt pointed out, we need to have a strong public space to ensure as well a strong private space. Recent impositions have put all of that in mortal danger. Thus, the way we recover is doing it together in partnership. Partnership means talking and working things out together. It means agreeing on an aspiration for a calmer, more reasonable approach, one that believes in the indelible importance of putting things to the people. We have to remind ourselves that the public is made up of our colleagues, our neighbours, our friends and our family. So it is to working together, to convene, to create, to inspire and to transform, that we need to do this crucially together. As we do so in the spirit of recovery, we encourage as many as possible to join with us on this journey, on this very human journey of discovery as well as recovery. Because after all, and we have to keep reminding ourselves, that is what it means to live, that is what it means to be human. Sharing, engaging, reflecting, and working things out together. So it's an exciting time full of possibility. We should be doing regular recovery polls to engage with the public, and they will cover a wide range of questions from health, wellness, work and leisure, looking at their changing views and as things develop with regard to the virus and also to policy, seeing how families interact and much more. And we've commissioned the first of these reports, which we're making available to all of you today, which was of a survey of 2,000 people of 18 years old and above across the UK with Yonder and Omnibus data. We asked them an array of questions which you can see, but I want to draw your attention to one really standout thing. Almost 3 out of 4 adults in the UK are more concerned with the consequences of lockdown than they are of catching COVID. Now, we have an opportunity, and we know that, though, that there are still many worried. We've seen in Melbourne coming out of an enormously long lockdown and pronouncements in France and Germany to go into them. that it's with a spirit of openness and with public-mindedness of civility to one another that we're embarking on recovery. We're all faced with an option right now, as John said, and what we decide will shape the coming period and the future. Are we to be shut down, hidden away, closed off and cowering? Or are we to embark upon a new renaissance of imagining, of working together, dynamically building, entrepreneurially sharing, looking after people that need it and want it, artistically sculpting the world as we want to see it, all the while protecting those that need it, together? We've all agreed that we should come together for recovery. We now invite all of you to do so. It's so time for recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. We have a little bit of time left, which we can open for questions, if we have any questions for any of the speakers.
I wouldn't mind saying something. I'm Robert Hawley. I'm hearing about hosting this.
Yes, please, would you like to?
In what will is it on? Yeah, I believe very much in what you're trying to do. Obviously, I'm part of the hospitality industry, and that, like the entertainment industry, has effectively borne the brunt of the restrictions that we've seen over the last months. Our industry has actually had 5 months without any income whatsoever. And my business at the moment is running at something like 20% of where it was the same time last year. We have a large percentage of our staff on furlough in the various countries of Europe where I operate, where the schemes are already in existence and have been adapted to the current circumstances. Here it was specially constructed, and I must say very, very efficiently, but it's coming to an end. As a result, I'm having to make 80 people out of a staff of 450 redundant in this country. This is not the case elsewhere. My business depends very much on international travel, and London as a centre depends on international travel. And until that returns to normality, the city is going to suffer, and businesses like mine are going to continue to suffer. There seems to be no focus in government on this side of things. They talk about the economy as some sort of abstract issue. The economy is about the livelihoods of millions of people who are working every day. And if they can't work, they can't look after their families will suffer, as we've heard, and other illnesses will arise. As the professor was saying, people are not being treated. People are dying every day. There are more people dying of other things than 1,500 people a day die in this country. 100 die of COVID. That's all that matters. You can die of heart attacks, cancer, strokes, influenza. That's fine, but you can't die of COVID, or rather with COVID, because there's some doubt as to the statistics there. And we've got to force the government to change tack. The reality is that if you look at excess deaths in the 2017-18 flu epidemic year, it was 50,000. We're about the same level now. There's not a lot of difference. I'm old enough to remember the Hong Kong flu, when 80,000 people died in this country. The economy wasn't shut down. It was hardly mentioned. In fact, I don't remember anything. I was 23 at the time. I don't remember anything about it. So we really got to force the government to think about the wider issues, the collateral damage that it's doing the policies follows, and the reality of making thousands of business bankrupt or more heavily indebted than they are now. And the country is going in the same direction. It's got to stop. And the only way to make it happen, I think, is with a movement of this kind, because independent voices aren't listened to. And so it needs a body of opinion to be got going to persuade government to change its mind. So I congratulate everybody who's involved in putting this together. I'm fully supportive myself, and I'll do everything I can to help. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you to Sir Rocco for his hospitality in giving us the room, and we do very much appreciate the support. On which note, a question came in actually online, which I think is worth mentioning. There are a number of different questions out there. I apologise, by the way, if we don't get to everybody, so I know there are a lot of people viewing online. But one gloriously cynical journalistic question that came in was, who's paying for all this? And I'm slightly flattered by it, because it indicates that the impression we're giving out there is that somewhere, someone has put a huge amount of money in. In fact, most of the people who probably would like to support us are, like Sir Rocco, sadly, losing an enormous amount of money, and most of their cash, I believe, is going to keeping people in jobs, which is where it should be. Sorry, I'm speaking through my mask still. Easy to forget. That's where it should be going. We're grateful for anybody who wants to back us, because we really need money. But I should say, for those who are cynical, what you're looking at is not money, it's motivation. We've actually done almost everything here with next to nothing. And we've been able to do that because so many talented people in so many sectors of the economy just are so keen to see this change. And almost everybody who's put this together, as Sir Rocco has with the room, has donated the resources that have made this come into being. So I'm very glad the question that's been asked is, who's paying for this? Because the truth is, actually, there is really very little money behind it. There is passion, there is belief. There are growing numbers of people who are just desperate to change things. Money, so far, has not been the thing that's actually mattered. We've got here because people want to see things change. But there's one other thing I would say just in regards to that question, and that comes back to a point that I made, which is a little bit sad, really, because I think with all the passion and all the belief that we've heard today, and the sincerity, I think, with which all the speakers have spoken, we've heard the sadness. We've heard really the fact that we've got to a point in this debate where people simply cannot stand by and see the damage get worse. And yet there are people out there who want the damage to get worse. I think we could all name them. We could probably point to someone who's on breakfast TV every morning, who seems to rejoice in helping the damage to get worse. And those sort of people are out there asking the sorts of questions like, who's paying for this? I know that when we went public yesterday, the first thing that happened was that all the co-founders who are public online found that their pasts and their histories were being investigated, so that people could somehow dig up some fragment of something to try and discredit the organization. I hope and I believe that they won't find anything, but the tactic of smear is not going to derail this organization or this debate, because we're standing for something that hundreds of people in this, listening to this, I'm sure, millions of people in this country believe in, want. If I'm not here, others of my co-founders will take my place. If they're not there, thousands more will stand up and demand change. This movement is bigger than any one of us. Recovery is something that millions want, and millions will not let this cause be derailed. I think there are more questions coming in.
I'll read out a question that's coming online. So this is from Leslie Caton. Emma rightly pointed out that the government are acting in an unprecedented and authoritarian manner in response to COVID-19. However, it seems that it's not just the government that are acting this way. The official parties of the opposition, the Labour Party, Lib Dems, Greens, SDP, Plaid Cymru, etc., are pushing for an even harsher measures to be implemented. It appears that political games are being played with our lives and livelihoods. How might we address this failure of leadership?
Any of the speakers in the room like to answer that? So, Harvey Goldsmith.
I don't think it is a failure of leadership. I think it is a mode that governments really don't have any choice but to do, because government's role, in fact, is to protect the welfare of everybody. I only ask from all of our positions and all the things that have been said today is just to have a rethink, to step back a little bit and rethink of the other side of the effects of what they are demanding and think about a positive way of moving forward. And those, to some extent, if you listen to what everybody's spoken about today, they're looking at another side of it. They're making the case against this total lockdown and kind of no movement, because they don't feel it's going to be the ultimate solution, which is what everybody's talking about. But there is a positive side of it that has to come out of it. Last week, for example, I met some people from Imperial College. They showed me and demonstrated a 20-second spit test, which for our industry would absolutely change it overnight. For the airline industry, would change it overnight. For anywhere in hospitality, it would change their lives overnight once it starts to get accepted. But it has to be part of a set of protocols. And as everybody in the room knows, and particularly those that are involved in it, if you put 3 scientists in a room, you'll get 3 different opinions. And that's problematic. And that's the difficulty that governments are working with now. So they're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but they could be doing a lot more right.
Do we have more?
Yeah, we've got one more coming in from Alex Webster. So I would like to ask what the campaign might look like. There is an enormous amount of government advertising encouraging restrictions and distancing. Likewise, the media are continually promoting dubious academic voices, encouraging one thing, which is more lockdown. The psychological damage on the population is incalculable. What will recovery be doing to meet this challenge?
I think that's probably one for me. So the short answer is everything we can, I guess. As I said, we have 5 reasonable demands which we will be putting to government. That'll be the basis of our campaign in the first instance. I think if government, it's very hard to argue with any one of the things that we're signing up, that we're asking. I believe if the government signs up to those 5 very moderate principles, that in itself will see a significant change, and a change for the better. Campaigning for those principles, I think, means rallying support, and we should be rallying support in whatever way we can. We can't compete with the machine of fear that is rolling its messages across the country. We simply do not have the resources, and even if we did, this is not a fair fight. The government introduced broadcasting rules that mean that you can't cover this in a balanced way. So we have, I mean, many people are unaware that when they watch the TV, when they watch the news, they're not watching the balanced news that they come to expect. They're watching news that is subject to emergency broadcasting rules. That in itself is a little bit disturbing, I think. So yes, it's going to be a difficult fight, but we have the hearts and minds, I believe, of the people in this country. And I just go back to the poll that Alan mentioned. We commissioned a poll today, we commissioned a poll which we got the results from today, into what it is that people in this country most fear at the moment. So we asked the question, what is it that you're most afraid of? And the answer came back very, very clearly. There were a significant number of people who are most afraid of COVID. That's not really surprising after what is probably the biggest campaign of fear this country has ever seen. But 3/4 of the people, almost, had other things that were far more troubling to them. Cancer treatment being one of them, mental health being a very, very big concern, particularly for children and young people, and the future of their children, whether there'll be a job next year. Those things are all deeply troubling people at the moment, and they put those first. And while people put those things first, I think the essence of what we're saying will be something that they'll welcome. And even though we will have a relatively small share of voice, we will still get the message out. Is that it? In that case, I think it's been a very emotional, memorable, and very, very important day, I think. What we have done today is, I think, unique in my lifetime. Never before have a group of people from so many different backgrounds, from so many different walks of life, so many different political views, so many different lifestyles, come together with one overriding objective: to get change. Never before, really, have we faced a situation like this. I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I certainly hope it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And it's a privilege to be part of the organisation that I think will reverse the direction of travel in this country. Thank you, everybody online, for listening. Thank you, everybody in the room, for being here. Thank you to all those who've very generously given their time. Thank you to fantastic speakers. I couldn't have chosen people who would have spoken more eloquently, more powerfully, and given put together a more effective case as to why things must change. Change will come. It's time for recovery.